We're beginning Chapter 18, Nazi Roots of American Central Intelligence, the Biological Warfare Industry, of emerging viruses, AIDS and Ebola, nature, accident, or intentional. Realizing now that anything was possible in the realm of CIA activity and biological experimentation, I continued to search back issues of Covert Action Information Bulletin for leads. I quickly located a fascinating article published in 1986 by Peter Dale Scott, Ph.D., a former Canadian diplomat and professor of English at the University of California. The Political Academician produced an eye-opening expose on the Nazi medical officers who escaped prosecution through their service to American intelligence. His work and several related articles documented the excessive zeal with which U.S. Army intelligence and later CIA personnel protected war criminals, including the infamous Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele, or Mr. Tolkmith. That's another book I'm reading. Well, maybe I'll read that. His assistant, the Butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie, Walter Ralph, the SS Mobile Gas Chambers supervisor, Frederick Schwend, another mass murderer, and Walter Emil Schreiber, the Nazi chief of medical science, who the CIA brought to the Global Preventive Medicine Division of the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine. All of this occurred under Project Paperclip, Scott wrote. It has become only too obvious that the OSS, the wartime precursor to today's CIA, arranged for numbers of wanted criminals to escape from camp, and when necessary, supplied them with new identities to protect them from justice. Murderers, far from being exempted from such protection, seem to have been among those most likely to obtain it. Scott explained that by no coincidence, many of these medical sadists ended up in various countries having established links with neo-fascist elements in the military or interior ministries. All of them collaborated in repressive operations against the left, and many appeared to be operating as arms dealers or intelligence assets in CIA-supported operations. Barbie and Schwend, for instance, were active during the CIA-assisted overthrow of Chile's Allende government. The two negotiated arms deals with the German I can't say that word. Fucking Germans. B.N.D. Federal Intelligence Service, itself as a descendant of the Galen Intelligence Network, commonly referred to as the Galen Org, which in 1945 passed from the leadership of the Nazi SS to that of American intelligence, and eventually the CIA. Later it was determined that both Barbie and Schwand were on the U.S. payroll and worked after World War II for U.S. Army counterintelligence. The organization, I recalled, for whom Henry Kissinger also worked to uncover such Nazis. This figure 18.1. Nazi medical doctors and biological warfare experiments conducted on prisoners. Nazi doctor in demand. In September 1951, after 28 months with Project Paperclip medical staff in Frankfurt, Germany, Major General Walter Emil Schreiber was brought to the United States for a 6-month stint at the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine in Texas. The Nazi chief of medical science, Dr. Schreiber, was directly responsible for some of the most ghoulish medical experiments the Nazis conducted on concentration camp inmates. According to massive evidence revealed during the Nuremberg trials, some of the experiments cleared or reviewed by Schreiber included supervising Dr. Karl Gebhardt, later hanged for his crimes, who had operated on young Polish girls using gas gangrene. Injecting humans and mice interchangeably with transfers from each other of deadly typhus virus to produce a live vaccine. Others were injected with various infectious epidemic jaundice. Sterilizing male prisoners by surgery, x-ray, and drugs, submerging victims in tanks of ice water to measure shock levels, locking prisoners in low-pressure chambers to simulate flight altitudes of up to 68,000 feet, which invariably resulted in collapse of their lungs, exposing subjects to heavy doses of incendiary phosphorus material. With grotesque irony, Schreiber's role in Texas was consultant to Global Preventative Medicine Division. In March 1952, after Schreiber's presence in the U.S. had been discovered by columnist Drew Pearson, his continuing work for the American military was defended by Air Force General Robert Eaton. Dr. Schreiber was hired by the Air Force because of his extensive experiments in the fields of epidemiology and military preventative medicine, coupled with his peculiar knowledge of public health and sanitation problems in certain geographical areas. He has collaborated in the preparation of a treaty on the epidemiology of air travel and has been able to furnish the Air Force with valuable information. I'm sure he has. Apparently, due to the embarrassment and controversy resulting from public exposure of their collaboration with Schreiber, Project Paperclip officers generally found similar work for him in Argentina and flew him there on May 22, 1952. Another of the hundreds of Nazi war criminals with whom the U.S. joined forces was Major General Kurt Blom. Some of the Nuremberg charges against him included wholesale practice of euthanasia by injecting intravenous, undiluted lethal phenol, executions of tubercular Polish prisoners, various uses of biological warfare. His specialty, he admitted to U.S. Army interrogators in July 1945 that he had conducted experiments on his victims with plague vaccine on orders of the notorious mass murderer Heinrich Himmler. Incredibly, Blom was acquitted by the Nuremberg tribunal, though the prosecutors had gathered a great deal of evidence about his activities. Just 2 months after his acquittal, he was contacted by 4 employees of the Army Chemical Corps at Camp Dietrich for a discussion about biological warfare. Blum cooperated and also volunteered the names of other German biological warfare specialists. In August 1951, he signed a Project 63 contract as the camp doctor at the U.S. Army Occupation Force European Command Intelligence Center at Oberursel. A subsequent Defense Department contractual document shows the following entry under the heading of Qualifications: Professor of Medicine, with emphasis on research of tuberculosis and cancer and biological warfare. One of these lesser-known Nazi doctors, Herbertus Strughold, a Luftwaffe member, was reportedly knowledgeable about a deadly low-pressure chamber experiments on concentration camp inmates, though it is not known whether he came to the U.S. as a part of Paperclip or 63. What? He worked for the U.S. Air Force for many years and is still living today. Wait a minute. Though it is not known whether he came to the U.S. as part of Paperclip or 63. What is 63? He worked for the U.S. Air Force for many years and is still living today at Brooks Air Force Base near San Antonio, Texas, in Herbertus Strughold Aeromedical Library, named after the man they fondly called the father of aerospace medicine. Here's our Mr. Walter Emil Schreiber. Kissinger balling and paperclip. By this time, I was hardly surprised to learn that Alexander Bowling, for whom Kissinger translated, played a leading role in Project Paperclip and the Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC. This information came from Linda Hunt's meticulously documented expose, Secret Agenda, Nazi Scientists, the United States Government, and Project Paperclip 1945 to 1990. The Joint Intelligence Command, Hunt explained, was involved in Project Paperclip from its inception and was the key military intelligence agency involved in administering a combined CIA military intelligence report that employed former Nazi scientists to investigate numerous mind control techniques and drugs. It was codenamed Bluebird, later renamed Artichoke, and paved the way for the CIA's infamous Project MKUltra. Moreover, according to Hunt's extensive documentation obtained through FOIA, Bowling in 1948 became Director of Intelligence and godfather of the JIOA, Joint Intelligence Operation Association? Oh, here it is. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency. That was kind of close. That ran Project Paperclip. At the same time, Bowling also served as a high-ranking member of the Inter-American Defense Board, IADB, Inter-American Defense Board, a Washington-based group that served to deliver Schreiber, Mengele, and Barbie to safe havens in South America, where they continued to work on CIA projects. Barbie's history is best known. Condemned to death by the French for genocidal murders in Lyon, Barbie was concealed and protected for 4 years in Germany by the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, which was using him as an informant to spy on, ironically, the French. After the Communists were dropped from General de Gaulle's cabinet, the Nazi Barbie was reassigned to spy on the American houses set up by the U.S. Department, which were, according to Barbie's American handler, stocked with all kinds of left-wing literature. Wait a minute. American houses set up on the U.S. State Department, which were, according to Barbie's American handler, stocked with all kinds of left-wing literature. Barbie's report may thus have helped fuel the attack on this program 5 years later by Joe McCarthy, whose charges against the State Department were based on documents leaked to him by a source in Army intelligence. Later, when a 1983 Justice Department investigation of Barbie by Alan A. Ryan revealed evidence of what Scott called a conscious, coordinated cover-up, it was noted that officials at the highest levels of the United States government had directed a misinformation campaign. The effort was apparently designed to dispel the impression that the Counterintelligence Corps was apparently designed to dispel the impression that the Counterintelligence Corps ever had an interest in Barbie. In addition, got a deer walking outside, distracting me. Damn. I don't even know where I was. Scott noted that this behavior easily recognized. Okay, I wasn't there. The effort was apparently designed to dispel the impression that the Counterintelligence Corps ever had an interest in Barbie. In addition, Ryan's investigation revealed contradicting internal memos regarding the government's search for Barbie and the mistranslation of press statements and internal memos about Barbie into interagency communications about a non-existent Barbier. Scott noted that this behavior was easily recognized by FBI and CIA observers as a method of withholding files about Barbier when pressed to disclose intelligence on Barbie under the Freedom of Information Act. As another example, the Berkeley professor recalled that following the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the CIA told the FBI it had no CIA-generated material on Lee Harvey Oswald in its files. That's bullshit because he straight up worked for the CIA. This was true in the sense that all such documents had referred to a mythical Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah, he flew missions, even for Castro, not for Castro, but in flying munitions to Castro covertly. Didn't know about him. The Merknet. Besides disclosing Barbie's ties to the CIA, Ryan's official investigation report connected Nazi and Army intelligence to the Galen Org and the Merknet. The Merknet was also a network of counterintelligence corps informants, so named for its leader, Kurt Merck. The Galen Org had tried to recruit Merck as its chief counterintelligence operations. Scott wrote that by March 1948, the Counterintelligence Corps had established liaison with the CIA in Europe because of the latter's interest in the Merknet, but American intelligence interest in Reinhard Galen, the Nazi chief of intelligence on the Soviet front, went back even further to 1945. This was just 3 months prior to the creation of the official policy of coordination. The earliest name given the CIA Undercover Operations Division, Scott questioned. Could Mengele, a doctor with a penchant for lethal experiments on human guinea pigs, could even Mengele have been saved as a result of a secret deal between Alan Welsh Dulles, director of American intelligence, and the SS? Such a hypothesis would once have been almost unthinkable, but we have since been told that his colleague in the Auschwitz human experiments, Walter Schreiber, was shielded by the Americans from a Polish conviction in absentia so that he could help guide the post-war researchers of the U.S. Air Force in bacteriological warfare. Given the provision of false documents and slight name changes to protect German intelligence assets, I now wondered whether there was any connection between Merck and MERK and MERCK. Merck and Merck. My suspicions were fueled even more by Scott's revelation that in 1960, Barbie, another straight-hand-ranking Nazi official including Alphonse Sasson and Frederick Schwend, had dug into their war chest to establish a CIA front company known as Elestra. Ostensibly, Elestra dealt in a quinquina bark. Hold on, I gotta get this. Okay. Where was I? Okay. The company exported the bark as agents for the German drug firm Boehringer, which grew rich on quinine contracts to the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. And although public registry records are non-existent, at least one Bolivian arms dealer still remembers Estrella also dealt in the weapons trade. In essence, fortunes were being made through drugs and arms sales by the secret organization for which General Bolling and Henry Kissinger worked to draft ex-Nazis into military and industrial leadership positions, and American intelligence posts. Some even pioneered the Merck-directed biological weapons industry. Nazis in the Navy and viruses from the sky. Besides the involvement of Nazis in bacteriological weapons experiments conducted by the Air Force, General Bolling's Joint Intelligence Operations Assessment, JIOA, imported several biological weapons experts into the United States for the Navy as well. Eric Traub, for instance, in charge of biological warfare for the Reich Research Institute on the secluded island of Rheims, where his biological warfare research specialty was viral and bacteriological diseases, and his assistant, Ann Berger, went to work for the Navy in 1951 under Project Paperclip, assigned to the Naval Medicine Research Institute Laboratory in Bethesda. Their work included conducting experiments on animals to determine the lethal dose for more than 40 strains of highly infectious viruses. Within 10 years, the Navy's Biomedical Research Laboratory, NBRL, Navy Biological Research Laboratory, NBRL, along with Littleton Bionetics, had become a chief supplier of cell cultures for cancer research studies to National Cancer Institute investigators throughout the world. By the early 1960s, the Naval's Biomedical Research Lab became closely associated with the University of California, where Peter Duesberg was working on National Cancer Institute projects. And that's the AIDS guy. Naval studies directed by Dr. Mark A. Chattaghy and Biohazards Control and Containment Segment Chief Dr. Alfred Helleman, also associated with the Atomic Energy Commission, sought to identify the effects of viral aerosols on animals and humans. Their principal National Cancer Institute grant objective was to evaluate the effect of selected stress situations on induction of viral disease or cancerous trauma, and to evaluate the role airborne particle size might play in such interactions. At the same time, another Navy study was underway to determine the fundamental biology of tumor cells and the interaction between tumor cells and viruses that cause cancer. This study, begun October 1st, 1962, relied on the expertise of Dr. Walter Nelson Reese, described by Strecker as the keeper of America's cell lines. The Navy University of California collaborative effort was officiated by the National Cancer Institute's Solid Tumor Virus Segment, Vice Chairman James T. Duff, who, along with Robert J. Hubner, the segment's chairman, worked closely with Duesberg on his studies to determine the structure and regulating mechanisms of cancer viruses. Following this decade of progress, a 1971 National Cancer Institute report summarized this study group's proposed course of action. Continue to develop cell reagents as substrates for human carcinogenesis. Attempt to isolate and characterize viral agents from human tumor cells. Continue a reference laboratory of cells in culture. Continue a reference laboratory of cells in culture. Study oncogenic viral antigens such as embryogenesis, development of the human embryo, and continue the basic research in the biology of tumor viruses. Though by the time I had grown accustomed to shockingly new evidence, I still balked on finding these documents linking Hitler's biological weapons chief to the National Cancer Institute's finest. The Galen Org. The Galen Org, the German intelligence agency run by Reinhard Galen, was even more powerful than the Merknet, MERK. The org superseded even the Nazi SS because of its pre-war connections with the Abwehr, or German military intelligentsia. In fact, Galen's organization is largely credited for giving rise to the CIA. After Hitler, Galen served Alan Welsh Dulles, whose Operation Sunshine brought Nazis into the U.S. spy service. According to Scott, what ultimately persuaded Truman in 1947 to authorize an operational CIA was in fact partly the need to find an institutional home for the post-war Galen Org. In 1948, Dulles helped write the memo persuading Truman to take on the Galen Org on Galen's own terms. Well, if anybody looks up the attack on Los Angeles, I don't know if it's an attack, but it was essentially alien-type craft hovering over Los Angeles around that same time and over the White House. They were firing anti-aircraft shells at him. Nothing was happening to him. So the Nazis had what we consider UFOs, or anti-gravitic craft. And that could also be another reason, like, hey, you guys technically won the war, but you won the battle, but we won the war. You can take the credit for winning the war while we are out in Antarctica building the Fourth Reich and infiltrating every aspect of your country. So, did we win? Not really. On paper, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. How Dulles acquired so much power as to persuade the nation's chief executive to form the CIA, a successful bid to shield Galen and the entire German intelligence network from harm's way. Galen was a ranking official in the Soviet Military Order of Malta, SMOM, Soviet Military Order of Malta, which maintained inconceivable financial political influence. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about right here. Figure 18.2, Navy studies on response to viral aerosols. Objective. This contract has 4 objectives. They are 1. Virus laboratory hazard evaluations. The objective of this section of the proposal is to evaluate the extent of possible hazards involved in biochemical and biophysical procedures used in virus tissue culture laboratories. 2. Studies on environmental effects of physical and biological characteristics of viral aerosol. The objective of this section, the proposal, is to provide survival data of both model and oncogenic viruses as related to environmental parameters. Temperature, RH changes, and trace chemicals, decontaminants, for use in Section 1, and to evaluate the importance of N spectrum, 0.1 to 0.5 UM, 15 to 15 UM particles on virus-host interaction, considering both the hazard to humans and animals and the potential for cross-contamination. 3. Host-virus interactions. The objective of this section is to evaluate the effect of selected stress situations, physiological as by hormonal imbalance, immunological as by concurrent infection or biochemical, as by exposure to injurious chemical vapors or aerosols, or induction of viral disease or cancerous trauma, and to evaluate the role airborne particle size might play in such interactions. 4. Evaluation of disinfectants and decontamination procedures for selected viruses. The objective of this section is to conduct studies for the decontamination efficiency of selected disinfectants on the viruses selected from Section 2 with the purpose of recommending optimal procedures. In this source, National Cancer Institute staff, the Special Virus Cancer Program, Progress Report Number 8, Office of Associate Scientific Director of Viral Oncology, OASDVO, J.B. Maloney, E.D., Washington, D.C., U.S. Government Printing Office, 1971, page 224. If you want to look it up yourself, I guess. Francois Hevet, the pseudonym for a researcher who spent many years investigating the Soviet military order of Malta, explained, representing initially the most powerful and reactionary segments of the European aristocracy for nearly 1,000 years, beginning with the early crusades of the 20th century, it has organized, funded, and led military operations against states and ideas deemed threatening to its power. It is probably safe to say that the several thousand knights of the Soviet military order of Malta, principally in Europe, North, Central, and South America, comprise the largest, most consistently powerful, and reactionary membership of any organization in the world today. To be a knight, one must not only be from wealthy aristocratic lineage, one must also have a physiological worldview which is attracted to the crusader mentally of these warrior monks. Participating in Soviet military order of Malta, including its initiation ceremonies and feudal ritual dress, members embrace a certain caste class mentality. They are sociological and psychologically predisposed to function as shock troops of Catholic reaction. Mind-controlled slaves, if you ask me. And this is precisely the historical role the Knights have played in war against Islam, against the Protestant heresy, and against the Soviet evil empire. The Catholic Rite and the Knights of... If the Catholics were fighting against the Nazis, why did they usher them in? God, this doesn't make any sense. The Catholic Rite and the Knights of Malta, in particular, Baron Franz von Papen, played a critical role in Hitler's assumption of power and the launching of the Third Reich's 20th century crusade. Hervet further explained that the Soviet military order of Malta's influence in Germany survived World War II intact. On November 17, 1948, Galen received the Grand Cross Merit Award, one of the organization's highest honors. Subsequently, he was installed by American intelligence officials as the first chief of West Germany's equivalent of the CIA. I'm not even, the D.M.D, I think. I am not saying that word. Under West German Chancellor Audner had received the Magistral Grand Cross personally from the Soviet military order of Malta Grand Master Prince Chigi. Galen's brother, in the meantime, had already been in Rome serving as secretary to von Hosenstein, conveniently for Reinhard, who was then negotiating with American intelligence for the preservation of his Nazi colleagues. Thus, Hohenstein was chairman of one of Soviet military order of Malta's Grand Magistral Charities, the Institute for Associated Emigrations. Hohenstein thus arranged for 2,000 ESMON passports to be printed for political refugees. Meanwhile, throughout the war, another ESMON member, Joseph J. Larkin, the vice president of the Rockefeller-owned Chase Manhattan Bank, had managed to keep the financial institution open in Nazi-occupied Paris. Wonder how you did that, huh? Larkin had received the Order of the Grand Cross of the Knights of Malta from Pope Pius IX in 1928, or the 11th. Yeah, that's the 11th. Pope Pius XI in 1928. He was an ardent supporter of General Franco and, by extension, Hitler. More financial interests and intelligence ties Somehow I wasn't surprised to learn that financial motives besides ideological, were at the heart of SMOM and the Nazi-American alliance. Scott critically reviewed two books by authors with wartime intelligence backgrounds, one by Ladislas Farago, entitled Aftermath, Bormann, and the Fourth Reich, New York, Avon Books, 1975, and the other by William Stevenson, The Bormann Brotherhood, New York, Harcourt Brace, Jovanovich, 1973, and gleaned enlightening facts about the financial assets of the Nazi bureaucracy and Martin Bormann, Hitler's deputy and party chief. The book Scott wrote point to the role of the extensive post-war assets collected or plundered by the SS and Bormann. This came from three sources: the proceeds from the SS forgery of British pound notes, Operation Burnhand, the looting of Jews and other Nazi victims, and most significantly, the corporate contributions to a special fund set up to guarantee the survival of German multinationals abroad after the impending collapse of Hitler. Soon after the war, OSS found an extensive documentation of a meeting in Strasbourg on August 10, 1944, to establish this fund between representatives of the SS Party and firms like Krupp, IG Farben, and Messerschmitt. But as the Cold War encouraged the U.S. to see the German corporate presence in Latin America in a more friendly light, the role of these firms in providing new careers for war criminals abroad was ignored. In fact, it was the key to the post-war status of Kameraden. After the war, documented evidence revealed that perhaps as many as 2,000 Nazi officials, many of them doctors and scientists, made their way into corporations operating in Latin America and the United States. With the help of American intelligence, the infamous Rat Line, the underground railway leading from Germany to Italy, served as the main conduit for Nazi travelers. Operated by the Austrian Office of the Counterintelligence Corps, Army Intelligence, thus maintained intimate ties to the Kameraden work, set up by Barbie with assistance from the Vatican and the Soviet Military Order of Malta. The most prominent Nazis known to have escaped by this route included Barbie himself, who escaped to Bolivia with Croatians, Frederick Schwen to Peru, the Croatians, Walter Rauff to Chile with Croatians, Alphonse Sasson to Ecuador, and Otto Skornzy, Hans Ulrich Rudel, and Heinrich Müller, all to Argentina. The Kameraden maintained close political, social, and business ties. By most accounts, Joseph Mengele was its leading representative in Paraguay. Otto Skornzy, acquitted of his criminal charges by the intervention of Western intelligence, but an unrepentant Nazi ideologue in the post-war era, became a sales representative of Siemens. Walter Rauff, designer of the gas ovens at Auschwitz, found first his employment in Latin America with a subsidiary of IG Farben, an employer of slave labor at Auschwitz. Franz Paul Stangl, chief of the Treblinka extermination camp, found post-war employment in Latin America with Volkswagen, as did Eichmann with Mercedes-Benz, and so on. Following Barbie's escape, the Counterintelligence Corps provided Barbie with a package of false documents, funds, and references for his new identity as Klaus Altmann. This information was revealed by author Magnus Linklater in The Nazi Legacy, Klaus Barbie, and the International Fascist Connection. A photograph of Barbie showing his Bolivian intelligence IDs is reprinted right here. But U.S. intelligence played an even more decisive role in exfiltrating Nazis into military medical industrial complex. By protecting the proceeds of Operation Burnhand, Western intelligence officials, Scott reported, knew enough about the British currency forging operation to protect the post-war pound. Thus, before the British government recalled the old and new issue notes, the SS profits were assured in the neighborhood of $300 million, which had been converted into genuine currency. Much of this money apparently made its way to the Vatican and from there into Joseph Larkin's hands at the Chase Bank. The man charged with laundering the Nazi war chest was Friedrich Schwinn, who between 1945 and 1946 became an important link in setting up the SS escape route to the Vatican. Indeed, the Vatican did have a program underway for the exfiltration of anti-communists. This was the work of Bishop Alois Hudal. Hudal? Anybody talking about the Black Dahlia murder from George Hodel? Similar, of the Collegium Teutonicum, a priest close to Pius XII and the future Paul VI, as well as public admirer of the Third Reich. After an interview in Rome with former Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller, Hudal had begun the work of supplying Vatican documentation for such prominent fugitives as Müller, Eichmann, and perhaps Martin Bormann. It was Hudal who gave the necessary introductions to the International Red Cross and other officials who, for a bribe, could smooth the fugitives' path. The combined efforts of Hudal and others, Stevenson wrote, helped hundreds of Nazis to escape. Farago detailed Heinrich Müller's exodus, driven from Murano, north of Italy, to Rome in Schwenn's chauffeured Mercedes. He deposited some of the Nazis' war chest at a Croatian seminary and made the historic contact with Bishop Hudal. But in 1972, documents found in Schwenn's possession report that the bulk of money that Bishop Hudal needed was placed at his disposal by a financier named Frederick Freddie Mercer. Mercer? Like the creator of Fox? Spelt with an S, though. Partner of Friedrich Schwend in Operation Bernhard, the money came from the hoard Schwend had amassed in Swiss accounts. However, Scott warned that both Farago and Stevenson withheld the most damning evidence linking the Kammerden work and Operation Bernhard to U.S. Army intelligence. Apparently from 1945 to 1946, while Schwend was making crucial arrangements to free hundreds of Nazis through the rat lines, Schwend was working for American intelligence. U.S. documents revealed that after passing into the hands of the 44th Counterintelligence Corps Detachment, he was used as an informant by American intelligence agencies. Corporate collaboration. The real treason, however, according to William Peterson, Jr., a professor of history at New York's John Jay College of Criminal Justice, was that 4 years before World War II and after a secret conspiratorial alliance between various American corporations and their Nazi collaborators betrayed and subverted U.S. national interests. Preston who headed the Fund for Open Information Accountability and Corporation, wrote, "The link between a fraternity of top business executives and the country's deadliest wartime enemy, the Third Reich, this collaboration between capitalism and fascism has been suppressed by the politically powerful for their own political purposes, yet the magnitude of the crime and damage it did, harm that included injuring and killing Allied and American fighting men and women, were not approximated in any other case of disloyalty for which the government had exacted retribution." Charles Hickman, author of Trading with the Enemy, an exposure of the Nazi-American money plot, 1933 through 1949, wrote that the fraternity of subversive business leaders shared ideological and economic reasons for collaborating with the Nazis. Ooh. Anti-Semitism sympathy for Hitler, distastes for the Roosevelt New Deal, and its supposed Jewish communist components blended with major financial, industrial, and technological alliances between German and American enterprises. During the 1930s, members of the fraternity supported the Black Legion, a Klan-type fascist organization based in Michigan, financed by American Liberty League's hate campaign against FDR, plotted a bizarre conspiracy to replace Roosevelt with General Smedley D. Butler, and initiated red-baiting propaganda that anticipated the House Un-American Activities Committee's worst excesses. Well, that guy was Mr. Roosevelt, definitely a type of communist. But a much more dangerous set of activities developed during the late years of the decade and continued throughout the war. These included sharing patents and secret shipment of oil and aircraft production data, photographs and blueprints of military and naval bases, and enough material on weapons to give the Germans a clear picture of American armaments as well as of Alaskan and Northwest defense systems, sending oil to Spain and Vichy France that was reshipped to the Nazis, refueling German tankers and U-boats, supplying tetraethyl lead and essential for aviation gasoline to Germany and Japan, manufacturing in subsidiary companies abroad an array of communications and electronic equipment that aided the German development of artillery fuses, rocket bombs, and radio technology, maintaining crucial radio links to the enemy nations in Latin America for intelligence transmissions, cooperating closely in the financial matters through the Chase Bank in Paris and the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Our own ITT was helping the Nazis too. All this and more took place. Wait a minute. I gotta check my plants.